If you were walking through Chicago that night, you probably wouldn't have noticed her, just another homeless girl trying to outwalk the cold. But Amber Robinson noticed something no one else did. A hand, small, still, sticking out of the snow near a dark alley. And when she called the number on that phone, the one labeled Papa, she had no idea she was about to speak to one of the most dangerous men in the city. The Chicago wind bit through Amber Robinson's threadbare coat like it had a personal vendetta. The kind of cold that didn't just sting the skin. It reminded you you'd been forgotten. Her hands were numb, tucked inside a pair of ripped gloves as she walked along Riverbend Avenue, the snow turning her lashes white. Somewhere behind the glittering skyline, people were laughing in warm apartments, sipping wine by fireplaces. But down here, under the flickering streetlight and the distant hum of traffic, Amber was just another ghost drifting through the city she once called home. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The only thing she carried was a paper cup of cold coffee and a heart that refused to give up, even when the world already had. She was headed toward her usual sleeping spot, a vent near an old laundromat that blew enough warm air to keep her alive through the night. But tonight, something felt off. The streets were too quiet. The snow fell thicker, muffling sound, swallowing the world whole. Then she saw it, a small figure lying near the curb, half buried in white. At first, she thought it was trash, or maybe a mannequin tossed from one of the boutiques up the block. But then the wind shifted, and she saw the faintest puff of breath. Amber froze. "Oh my God," she whispered, kneeling down. The girl couldn't have been older than 12, dressed in a private school uniform, her legs bare against the snow. A velvet ribbon was still tied in her hair, now crusted with frost. Her lips were blue, her body trembling violently. Amber's heart kicked hard. She stripped off her coat and wrapped it around the girl's small frame, pressing trembling fingers to her neck. A pulse, faint but there. "Hey, sweetheart. You hear me?" No response. Amber searched the snow around her, desperate for help. That's when she spotted a sleek black phone, half buried, near the curb. The screen flickered to life with a single contact. Papa. Her thumb hovered above the button. For a moment, she hesitated. What kind of father let his daughter wander out here like this? Then the girl shuddered violently, a weak gasp escaping her lips. Amber didn't think. She pressed the call. It rang once. Then a voice. Deep, cold, commanding. "Who is this?" Amber swallowed hard. "Your daughter. She's on the ground. She's not waking up. Please, she needs help." There was a pause, then. "Where are you?" "Riverbend Avenue, near the old DeLuca restaurant. Do not move. Do not call anyone. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Amber's pulse raced. 10 minutes later, she heard it. The low growl of engines. 3 black sedans appeared, gliding silently through the snow. Men stepped out first, tall and armed, their eyes sweeping the street like wolves on command. Then one car door opened, and he stepped out. Tall, dark overcoat, gloved hands, sharp eyes that burned even in the cold. Vittorio Santoro. He didn't need to introduce himself. The way the others moved around him, cautious, deferential, told Amber exactly what kind of man he was. He knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse, his jaw tightening. "Alara," he breathed. His voice cracked just once. Then he turned to Amber. "You found her?" "Yes," she stammered. "She was just lying there. I called the number on her phone." He studied her face for several seconds that felt like hours, assessing, calculating. "You saved her," he said finally. His tone was calm, too calm, like danger wrapped in gratitude. Before Amber could speak, he lifted Alara into his arms. His men opened the car door, but he didn't look away from Amber. "What's your name?" "Amber." "Amber what?" "Robinson." He nodded once. "Amber Robinson. Don't leave this street." The convoy vanished into the snow, engines fading into the dark. Amber exhaled shakily. It was over. She'd done her part. Or so she thought. Because as she turned to leave, a black-gloved hand caught her shoulder. Mr. Santoro would like a word. She froze. The snow kept falling, whispering secrets she wasn't supposed to hear. And just like that, Amber Robinson, the girl nobody saw, was being pulled into the world of the man everyone feared. The man's grip on her shoulder was firm, but not cruel. His black-gloved hand guided her toward the waiting car, where the open door glowed faintly with warm light. She hesitated at the threshold, her boots soaked. her breath trembling in white clouds. Inside, the man ordered. Amber's instincts screamed to run, but she didn't. The cars, the armed men, the silent coordination. This wasn't the kind of power you ran from and lived to tell about. She climbed in. The door shut with a muffled thud, sealing her away from the cold. Inside, it was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the ticking of the heater. The seats were soft leather, the air faintly scented with gun oil and something expensive, like tobacco and winter pine. Through the tinted window, she saw the other cars pulling ahead, escorting the one that carried Vittorio Santoro and his daughter. Her reflection in the glass startled her. Pale skin, wild hair, a bruise beneath her eye. She looked like someone dragged in from a different world. The man across from her spoke for the first time. "You'll answer questions. Speak only when spoken to." Amber nodded. She didn't trust her voice. The convoy sped through the streets, past the glittering towers of downtown Chicago and into quieter, darker districts where the snow turned to slush. Finally, they stopped at a building that looked nothing like a hospital, more like a private fortress disguised as one. Armed guards flanked the glass entrance. No signage, no patients, just silence. The man escorted her inside. The clinic was warm, painfully warm after hours in the freezing wind. The sudden heat made her dizzy. A nurse in gray scrubs took her coat. Another handed her a towel and gestured toward a seat. She obeyed, uncertain, her mind struggling to catch up. Steam curled from a cup of coffee placed in front of her. For a long moment, Amber just stared at it. Then she cupped it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Her throat tightened. It was the first real warmth she'd felt in months. Through a narrow window, she could see movement in the next room. Doctors. Shadows, the brief flash of a child's face. Alara. Tubes. Monitors. A man standing over her, still as stone. Vittorio Santoro. Even from a distance, his presence filled the room. He didn't pace or shout. He simply stood, his eyes locked on his daughter as though he could will her back to life through sheer force of will. Amber couldn't look away. One of the nurses noticed her staring and said quietly, "He hasn't left her side since he arrived." Amber whispered, "Is she going to be okay?" The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the glass. "If anyone can make sure of it, it's him." The nurse didn't explain further. Time blurred. Amber lost track of minutes, maybe hours, until the door opened behind her. She turned. Vittorio Santoro stepped in. Up close, he was almost too composed to be real. His black overcoat was gone, replaced by a dark shirt with sleeves rolled, just enough to reveal a pattern of ink trailing up his forearms. A silver signet ring gleamed under the cold fluorescent light, a family crest. Worn and sharp, he stopped in front of her, and the air seemed to shrink. "You're the one who called," he said. Amber's mouth was dry. "Yes." "Name?" "Amber Robinson." He studied her for several seconds. The silence pressed against her ribs. "You were alone?" he asked finally. "Yes, sir." "No one sent you?" She shook her head. "I just found her." His gaze was clinical, dissecting, but not cruel. It was the look of a man accustomed to catching lies before they were spoken. Amber's pulse thudded in her ears. Then, a sound from the adjoining room. A faint, hoarse whisper. "Papa." Both their heads turned. Through the glass, Alara's eyes fluttered open. A doctor rushed to her side, checking vitals, adjusting the four. Vittorio's composure fractured just slightly, a breath caught. Shoulders tensed, jaw unclenched. Amber saw it, the moment the devil became a father. He pushed open the door and went to her, one hand brushing her hair back from her forehead. His voice dropped low, softer than she would have believed possible. "I'm here, piccola mia. Rest." Alara smiled weakly before slipping back into shallow sleep. When he returned to Amber, something in his expression had changed. The steel was still there, but it was thinner now, cracked at the edges. "You saved my daughter," he said. Amber fidgeted with the coffee cup. "Anyone would have." No, his voice cut through her words, quiet but absolute. "Not anyone. Not where you were found." He sat across from her, the kind of deliberate movement that made every gesture feel intentional. "You could have walked away." Amber swallowed. "I thought she was dead at first. And yet you stayed." "She was just a kid." His eyes softened, briefly, then hardened again, like a door closing. For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of medical machines filled the silence. Finally, Vittorio leaned back in his chair. Where do you live, Miss Robinson? Amber almost laughed. Nowhere, really. His gaze lingered, assessing. No family. Not anymore. What did you do before? He gestured vaguely toward her ragged clothes. This? Amber hesitated. Waitressed. Cleaned. Sometimes temp jobs. It didn't last. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving hers. You've seen worse than snow, haven't you? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He stood, sliding his gloves back on. My men will drive you to the mansion. Amber blinked. Excuse me. You'll stay where I can find you. I what? What? You may have just saved my only child, he said, tone unreadable. That means you don't disappear into the streets again. She stood, heart pounding. I don't belong in your world. He turned toward the door, pausing only long enough to look back over his shoulder. Neither do I. The ride to the Santoro mansion was silent. Amber sat in the back seat beside a man who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. Snow blurred the city outside, transforming the world into a shifting landscape of white and gold. She tried to think about escape, about logic, but every time she replayed the night in her mind, the image of that little girl gasping for air surfaced. And behind her, always, those gray eyes. When the car slowed, Amber expected a gated home, maybe a luxury penthouse. What she saw instead looked more like a compound than a residence. Tall iron gates, security cameras hidden among bare winter trees. The driveway wound up toward a mansion that looked carved out of shadow, sleek, modern, and too quiet. Guards flanked the entrance. None spoke as the car approached. The moment Amber stepped out, her breath misted against the cold marble steps. Inside, warmth hit her again, not the kind of warmth that comforted, but the kind that reminded you it wasn't yours to keep. A woman in a black suit greeted them. Mr. Santoro said to prepare a room. Amber froze. Wait, I didn't agree to. The woman's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. It's not a request. Amber's pulse quickened. I don't want. Miss Robinson. Vittorio's voice echoed from the staircase above. He descended slowly, every step measured. The marble under his shoes didn't dare creak. I understand this is unexpected, he said, but my daughter will want to see you when she wakes. Until then, you'll stay here. Amber crossed her arms. You could have just said thank you. I don't say words I can't repay. She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her like a wave. Her limbs felt heavy, her head light. The warmth, the adrenaline, the chaos, it all caught up at once. She swayed slightly. One of the guards moved instinctively, catching her elbow before she fell. Vittorio's brow furrowed, the first sign of human concern she'd seen from him. Get her some food, he ordered quietly. And clean clothes. Amber blinked up at him. Why are you doing this? He met her eyes, unflinching, unreadable. Because the world owes you nothing. I do. She followed the woman down a long hallway, lined with portraits, generations of Santoros, all with the same sharp eyes and solemn faces. The corridors smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Every corner felt like it was listening. Her room was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. Cream walls, a fire flickering in the hearth, a bed draped in velvet. A tray of food waited on the table, soup, bread, fruit. Amber stared at it like it was a trick. The woman set folded clothes on the bed. Dinner will be brought up later. You may call the staff if you need anything. Amber glanced at her. Do you know what this place even is? The woman's polite mask didn't break. I know who runs it. Then she left. Amber sank onto the bed, staring at the fire. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, yet her feet stayed still. The flames danced across the walls, painting shadows that looked too much like ghosts. Hours later, she woke to faint footsteps outside her door. For a second, panic flared, then she heard voices. Low. Male. She's no one, one said. A stray. She saved the girl, another replied. Or staged it, the first hissed. Amber's stomach twisted. She pressed her ear against the door, but the voices faded down the hall. She turned back to the window. Snow was still falling outside, quiet, endless, unbothered. For the first time in months, she was warm, fed, safe. And yet, she'd never felt more trapped. Later that night, there was a soft knock on her door. Amber hesitated before opening it. Vittorio stood there, sleeves rolled, eyes shadowed with fatigue. For a man who ruled half the city's underworld, he looked human. Alaris stable, he said. Amber exhaled in relief. That's good. He nodded. She asked about you. Amber blinked. Me? She remembers your voice. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You can stay here until I decide what happens next. Her brows furrowed. Until you decide. His tone stayed calm, but there was an edge beneath it. In my world, Miss Robinson, nothing happens by accident. Not even miracles. He turned to leave, then paused. Rest. Tomorrow we'll talk. And then he was gone. Amber closed the door slowly, her heartbeat loud in the quiet. She leaned against it, staring into the firelight, unsure whether she'd just been saved or claimed. That night, she dreamed of falling snow and a pair of gray eyes watching her from the dark. Amber woke to the faint crackle of firelight and the soft patter of snow against the window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The sheets were heavy and warm, the room dimly lit by an ornate chandelier that glowed like frozen stars. Then she remembered the mansion, the guards, the man with eyes like winter steel. Vittorio Santoro. She sat up slowly. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something old, wax, paper, and silence. Even warmth here felt controlled, like everything else. Amber dressed in the clothes laid out for her. A soft gray sweater, plain slacks. Everything fit perfectly. Too perfectly. Someone had measured her while she slept. When she stepped into the hallway, she half expected to be stopped. Instead, a maid appeared silently at her side. Mr. Santoro requested you join the family for breakfast, the woman said. Voice flat, eyes lowered. Amber followed her down a corridor lined with portraits, solemn men in black suits, women with pearls and shadowed smiles. None of them looked happy. The dining room was vast, with a table long enough to seat 20. Only 3 places were set. Alara sat at the far end, pale but alert, her hair braided neatly over one shoulder. Vittorio stood behind her chair, speaking quietly to a man Amber hadn't seen before, tall, scarred, with sharp brown eyes and the build of a soldier. Their conversation stopped the moment she entered. Alara, Vittorio said without looking at her. This is Amber Robinson. The girl turned, offering a polite but cautious smile. You're the one who found me. Amber returned it awkwardly. Yeah, you gave me quite a scare. Alara's eyes flickered to her father before replying. Thank you. Her tone was careful, as if every word was weighed before release. Amber sat opposite them. The silence between them was filled by the quiet clinking of silverware and the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Vittorio barely touched his food. When he did speak, it was to his daughter, gentle, protective, a man whose every sentence seemed to guard against loss. Amber couldn't stop watching him. He looked different in daylight, no less intimidating, but more human. There was grief in the way his gaze lingered on Alara, as though he was seeing a ghost instead of a girl. After breakfast, Alara excused herself, guided by her governess. Vittorio rose to follow but paused by the window, hands clasped behind his back. The morning light caught the faint scar along his jaw. Rico, he said. The scarred man turned. Show her the grounds. Rico didn't look pleased. Yes, boss. As they walked through the mansion, Amber noticed the way staff moved. Precise, silent, eyes lowered. Every sound felt measured, every breath accounted for. This place doesn't feel real, she murmured. Rico grunted. It's not supposed to. They passed a gallery lined with photos. Vittorio, younger, holding a woman with soft eyes and dark curls. Alara, a toddler between them. The next frame showed only Vittorio and his daughter. The woman was gone. Amber stopped. His wife. Rico's expression hardened. You don't ask questions here. I didn't mean. He turned to face her fully, his voice low, dangerous. You're breathing because the boss allows it. Don't mistake that for safety. Amber nodded quickly, pulse spiking. They continued in silence. The mansion stretching endlessly around them, corridors of marble and shadow, staircases curling like secrets. It was beautiful, but not alive. Every wall whispered loss. That evening, Amber found herself in the library, drawn by the faint music playing from an old record player. Alara sat curled in an armchair, sketching quietly in a notebook. Amber lingered by the door. You draw? Alara nodded without looking up. Mama used to paint. Amber hesitated. What was she like? Alara's pencil paused midline. Beautiful, she said softly. And brave. She glanced up, meeting Amber's eyes. People say she died in a car crash. But I heard Papa once say she was taken. Amber frowned. Taken? Alara shrugged, going back to her sketch. He doesn't talk about it. Amber didn't press. But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of the painting above the fireplace, a woman's portrait. The resemblance to Alara was unmistakable. The eyes in the painting seemed to follow her as she left. Later that night, as the mansion quieted, Amber wandered toward the corridor leading back to her room. Voices drifted from behind a half-closed door, deep, urgent, restrained. Vittorio's. And the doctor's. She paused. Her blood work doesn't lie, the doctor was saying. The insulin was tampered with. Someone replaced it. A long silence followed. When Vittorio finally spoke, his voice was colder than the snow outside. You're certain? Yes, sir. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. Amber pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering. Tampered insulin. Deliberate. An attempt on Alara's life. She heard a chair scrape sharply against the floor. Vittorio's next words were so quiet they barely carried through the door. But they chilled her all the same. Find who did this. Amber crept away before anyone could see her. But her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Someone inside this fortress, a place guarded like a kingdom, had tried to kill a 12-year-old girl. And she, a homeless stranger, had stumbled into the middle of it. When she reached her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, chest heaving. Her reflection stared back from the window pane, wide-eyed, pale, small against the vastness of the world she'd been dragged into. From below, faint voices echoed through the vents. Orders, footsteps. The quiet hum of something vast beginning to move. The Santoro mansion was awake. And for the first time, Amber realized she wasn't just a guest. She was a witness. That night, she dreamed of Alara again, standing in the snow, calling for help that came too late. When Amber woke, her pillow was damp with sweat, and the sound of engines rumbled faintly outside. The war Vittorio Santoro lived in had just crossed its threshold, and Amber Robinson, the girl who'd once belonged nowhere, was now trapped in a house of ghosts, where every shadow had a name, and every silence hid a crime. The snow outside the Santoro mansion hadn't stopped in days. It felt like ash, muffling sound, softening light, making the world seem suspended in time. Inside, however, the air was taut, like a violin string stretched to the edge of breaking. Amber had been there long enough to notice it now. The way the staff spoke in half-sentences. The way footsteps seemed to pause whenever Vittorio passed. The mansion was alive, listening, and no one dared breathe too loudly. She tried to stay invisible, but it was impossible when Alara Santoro began to seek her out. At first, it was just little things. Asking Amber to join her for tea in the solarium. To read to her before bed. To braid her hair the way her mother used to. Slowly, the icy politeness that had wrapped the girl like armor began to thaw. Alara wasn't what Amber expected. She was bright but withdrawn, brave but fragile. A child who smiled too carefully, as if afraid of breaking something sacred. One afternoon, as snow dusted the glass walls of the solarium, Alara sat on the floor beside Amber, sorting through a velvet jewelry box. My mother used to wear a silver locket, Alara said suddenly. It had her initials, IS for Isabella Santoro. I used to borrow it when I was little, but it's gone now. Amber glanced up. Gone. Alara nodded, her brow furrowing. It disappeared the same night I collapsed. Papa said maybe I lost it at the restaurant, but I remember wearing it home. Amber's chest tightened. The night she'd found Alara in the snow came rushing back, the broken bracelet, the locked phone, the fear in her voice when she called for help. You think someone took it? Amber asked softly. Alara hesitated. I don't know, but it's strange, isn't it? Mama always said that locket was meant to protect me. That night, Amber couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Shadows shifted along the hallway walls, and every sound felt amplified. Footsteps, doors creaking, hushed whispers in rooms she wasn't supposed to hear. She wrapped a blanket around herself and slipped downstairs for water. As she passed the main hall, she saw him, Vittorio, standing near the grand piano. Alone, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but his reflection caught her in the glass cabinet nearby. You should be asleep, he said quietly. I couldn't. A faint smile tugged. At the corner of his mouth, something between amusement and exhaustion. Neither can I. She hesitated. Alara told me about her mother tonight. About a locket that's missing. Vittorio's hand froze midair. I thought you should know, Amber added quickly. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he set the glass down with a deliberate calm. Isabella's locket was one of a kind. A gift from me. White gold, diamond edge. It was on our daughter that night. He looked at her then, really looked, eyes sharp as glass. You think it matters? Amber swallowed hard. I think Alara remembers more than she realizes. Sometimes, the smallest things matter most. A long silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Vittorio's expression softened. You see what others miss. Amber almost smiled. It's how I survived. He studied her for another moment before nodding slightly. A gesture that felt like approval and warning all at once. The following morning, Amber noticed the bracelet again, the diamond one engraved Alara Santoro. Something about it nagged at her. The clasp didn't match the rest. It was newer, shinier, as though replaced recently. Alara, Amber said gently, crouching beside her as she drew by the fireplace. Did your father fix this bracelet? Alara shook her head. No. I've had it since my 10th birthday. What? Amber turned it over in her fingers. Because this clasp looks different from the original setting. Like someone swapped it out. Alara frowned. Maybe the maid did. I broke it once last year. Amber's instincts prickled. No, this was too deliberate. The replacement wasn't random. It was careful, subtle, hidden in plain sight. That night, when Vittorio returned from his meeting downtown, Amber gathered her courage and went to his office. Rico opened the door halfway, glaring. He's busy. It's important, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Inside, Vittorio stood by the window, sleeves rolled up, his forearm tattoo visible, an intricate design of a wolf wrapped around a dagger. He was reading a file, eyes tired but alert. Amber stepped forward and placed the bracelet on his desk. This clasp, she said quietly. It's been changed. Vittorio glanced down, frowning. Changed. She nodded. The metal looks newer. The engraving's slightly off-center. Whoever replaced it wanted it to look identical, but not quite enough for anyone to notice. Rico snorted. You're basing that on what, intuition? Amber ignored him. If someone tampered with Alara's insulin, maybe they used this to deliver something, residue, poison, corrosion, something subtle. Rico's expression hardened. That's absurd. But Vittorio didn't dismiss her. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Then he picked up the bracelet with gloved fingers. Get this tested, he ordered Rico. Rico hesitated. Boss. Now. Rico left, muttering under his breath. The room fell into silence. Vittorio studied Amber, his gaze unreadable. You notice details, he said finally. That can be dangerous. Amber held his stare. I just want to help. His jaw flexed. Help, he repeated softly. No one helps me without cost. Before she could respond, Rico returned with the in-house doctor, a pale, nervous man clutching a small case of tools. He examined the bracelet under light, scraping a sample from the clasp. After a moment, he looked up, face ashen. There are traces of potassium cyanate, he said, a compound that corrodes insulin vials when exposed to heat. Vittorio's expression didn't change, but the air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Someone wanted her insulin destroyed, the doctor added. Enough to trigger hypoglycemia. It was deliberate. Silence. Thick, suffocating. Vittorio placed the bracelet back on the desk, his hand steady. Who has handled my daughter's things? Rico listed names, the governess, the maid, the chauffeur, the doctor. Each name was a blade thrown into the air. When he finished, Vittorio looked at Amber again. You saw what no one else did. What? She hesitated. Because I know what it's like when no one's watching. People show their truth when they think they're invisible. He studied her, not like a suspect, but like a puzzle. Finally, he said, you may have just saved her twice. Then, quieter, almost to himself, Isabella would have liked you. That night, Amber sat awake in her room, the fire flickering low. Down the hall, she heard muffled voices, Vittorio giving orders, Rico making calls. The mansion was restless again. Amber touched the bracelet still burned into her mind and felt a chill. Someone inside these walls had tried to kill a child, and she was now the only outsider who knew it. She wasn't sure if that made her valuable or disposable. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent, endless, pure, while beneath it, the Santoro mansion buried its secrets deeper. The morning after the bracelet revelation, The Santoro mansion felt different. The silence wasn't peace, it was surveillance. Every sound seemed to echo against suspicion. Every shadow looked like it might be listening. Amber woke to the sound of low voices drifting from downstairs. She followed them quietly, barefoot on cold marble, stopping just before the study doors. Vittorio's tone was low, sharp, controlled, the kind that demanded obedience. "She's 12 years old, Rico. Whoever did this didn't just betray me. They declared war on my blood." Rico's response came tight with string. "It's the Rossetti Syndicate, boss. Has to be. They've been quiet for months. Too quiet. And after that deal in Palermo went south. Quiet men are the ones who plan the loudest," Vittorio cut in. "But this," he exhaled sharply, "this was inside work. The syndicate might have pulled the strings, but someone in this house tied the knot." Amber pressed her back against the wall, heartbeat quickening. The Rossetti Syndicate. She'd heard the name whispered in the kitchen late at night. Old rivals. Older grudges. Vittorio's voice dropped even lower. "Tell the informants to trace every contact. Bank accounts. Calls. Deliveries. If anyone's been feeding the Rossetti's information, I want their throat before the week ends." Rico grunted. Understood. The heavy silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. Someone in this mansion had already signed their death warrant. Later that afternoon, Amber was allowed to leave the estate for the first time since the night she found Alara. Vittorio had given her a list of groceries for the staff and a quiet nod. Permission and test rolled into one. The city beyond the wrought iron gates felt alien now. Streets she used to know by heart, where she'd begged, scavenged, survived, seemed smaller, colder. She walked with her hands in her coat pockets, snow crunching beneath her boots. Chicago's winter light painted everything in steel and silver. At the corner of Riverbend Avenue, she felt it, that sharp tug of instinct that had kept her alive when the world forgot. Her eyes. Someone was watching. She glanced over her shoulder. A black sedan idled across the street. Engine running, exhaust fogging in the cold air. Its windows were tinted, too dark to see through. Her pulse stuttered. Maybe it was nothing. Paranoia left over from living in fear too long. But when she turned down another block and saw the same sedan pull slowly forward, matching her pace, the lie died in her throat. Amber cut into a convenience store, pretending to browse. Through the reflection in the glass refrigerator door, she saw the car park outside. She left through the back exit. Snow fell harder now, coating the alley in white silence. She ducked behind a dumpster, waiting, listening. The car engine revved, then faded into the distance. Only when she was sure they were gone did she let out the breath she'd been holding. When she returned to the mansion, Vittorio was waiting in the entry hall. He stood by the grand staircase, coat draped over his shoulders, eyes like a storm. "Where were you?" His tone wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "You sent me for supplies," Amber said quietly. Rico appeared behind him, carrying a paper bag. "We found this in her cart at the market." Amber frowned. "You followed me?" "We follow everyone," Vittorio said. "It's how people stay alive around me." He stepped closer, his presence like heat in a cold room. "Tell me exactly what happened." Amber explained, the sedan, the alley, the feeling of being watched. When she finished, Vittorio's jaw was set like granite. "They're testing boundaries," he said, "seeing how far they can reach without bleeding." "Who?" "The Rossetti Syndicate." He said the name like a curse. "They're letting me know they can touch what's mine, even if it's just to scare her." "Her?" Amber asked. "Alara," he replied. "Or maybe you." The weight of his gaze made her chest tighten. "I don't understand." "You do," he said quietly. "You're part of this now. The girl who called me. The stranger who found my daughter." That story spread fast, faster than I could contain it. He turned away, pacing toward the window. "The Rossettis see you as leverage. And my enemies don't waste leverage. So what happens now?" Vittorio faced her again, eyes darker than the sky outside. "Now, you don't leave this property. Not for air. Not for errands. Not until I decide it's safe." Amber bristled. "You can't just keep me here." "I can," he said simply. "And I will. You're breathing because I said so." His voice wasn't cruel, it was law. Amber opened her mouth, but no words came. Somewhere deep down, she understood. This wasn't control. It was protection dressed in iron. Still, it burned. That night, the mansion felt restless again. Guards patrolled the grounds in heavy coats. their radios crackling softly. The security lights painted long shadows across the snow-covered courtyard. Amber sat by the window in her room, watching the flakes fall. For a moment, it was peaceful, until the peace shattered. A sudden roar split the night. Then boom. The explosion rocked the ground, rattling the glass panes. Amber jumped to her feet, heart hammering. Outside, a burst of orange lit the gates. Flames licking skyward as smoke rolled through the snow. "Fire!" someone shouted from below. She ran to the balcony and saw the wreckage. The iron gates engulfed in flame. Guards rushing with extinguishers. The acrid smell of burning fuel stung her throat. A Molotov cocktail. The Rossettis weren't testing anymore. Within minutes, Vittorio appeared in the chaos, flanked by armed men. His expression was unreadable, but his voice cut through the noise like thunder. "Double security. No one comes in or out. Anyone without a badge gets a bullet before a question." Rico barked orders. Men scrambled, and the fire hissed beneath the snow. Amber stood frozen at the balcony railing until Vittorio looked up and met her eyes. For a second, the distance between them vanished, the fury, the fear, the inevitability of what came next. Later, when the smoke had cleared, he found her in the hallway. His coat was damp with melted snow. His hair slightly disheveled, the only evidence that even he was human. "You saw?" he asked. Amber nodded. "They're sending a message. They're always sending messages." He took a slow breath, then his gaze hardened. "But this one's for me. You were followed today, and they torch my gates tonight. That's not coincidence. What do they want from me?" "Not from you," Vittorio said softly. "Through you." She frowned. "Meaning?" "They want to remind me that nothing in my world stays untouched. Not even the people who stumble into it." He stepped closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. "They know you exist now. That makes you a target." Amber's stomach dropped. "So what happens to me?" "You stay alive," he said simply. "And you stay where I can see you." His eyes held hers, sharp as ever. But there was something else there now. Something quieter. Not fear. Not pity. Resolve. That night, Amber lay awake again, staring at the ceiling as faint light from the courtyard flickered across her walls. The scent of smoke still lingered in the air. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't invisible anymore. Someone had noticed her, not for her pain, not for her poverty, but because she mattered now. But in the world she'd fallen into, being seen wasn't safety. It was a mark. And as the snow fell heavier outside the Santoro mansion, Amber Robinson understood a terrible truth. She wasn't a bystander anymore. She was bait. The chandelier lights shimmered like captured stars, their golden glow dancing across marble floors and champagne glasses. Music swelled from a string quartet near the balcony, and laughter, polished, hollow, and expensive, filled the ballroom. Amber stood near the edge of it all, clutching a tray she didn't need to hold. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't staff either. She was something in between, tolerated, watched, a living reminder that even the devil's world had cracks where angels sometimes wandered in. It was the Santoro family's charity gala, a night meant to display strength, wealth, and control. A public declaration that Alara Santoro had recovered, that the family was unbroken. But beneath the glitter, the air pulsed with tension. Men in tuxedos concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Guards scanned the crowd with discreet earpieces and colder eyes. Vittorio had turned his fortress into a theater of civility. But Amber could sense it, the unease, the static of danger humming just under the laughter. From her place near the wall, she watched Vittorio move through the room like a shadow in silk. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his composure unreadable. People approached him with smiles that never reached their eyes. He returned them with nods sharp enough to cut. He looked like power carved from marble. But tonight, there was something off. His focus drifted. His gaze, usually so precise, flicked too often to the corners of the room, to the exits, to Alara. Something was wrong. Alara stood near the grand staircase in a pale blue dress that shimmered under the light, her curls pinned up like a doll's. She smiled when people spoke. To her, the perfect image of a child restored to health. But Amber saw what others didn't. The stiffness in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hand when she reached for a drink of water. Amber walked over quietly. "You holding up, Snowflake?" she whispered. Alara's lips twitched into a small smile. "Papa says I have to be brave tonight." "You already are." The girl's eyes lifted toward her father across the room. He's different lately. He doesn't sleep much. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. Amber followed her gaze. Vittorio was speaking with the senator, smiling politely. But the smile was wrong. Too still, too sharp. Amber's gut tightened. Stay close to me, all right? Alara nodded, but before Amber could say more, a man approached, tall, dark-suited. His smile oily and precise. Signora Santoro, he said, bowing slightly. You look radiant tonight. Alara's polite nod mirrored her father's restraint. Amber recognized the emblem on the man's cufflink, a silver rose. The Rossetti insignia. She froze. He shouldn't be here. Before she could react, Vittorio appeared beside them, his presence slicing through the man's charm like a blade. Mr. Rossetti, Vittorio said coolly. I didn't know vermin received invitations. The man's smile faltered, but not for long. Business and charity often overlap, don't they, Santoro? I only came to congratulate your daughter's recovery. A miracle, truly. Amber saw it, the flicker of provocation in his tone. The bait. Vittorio leaned closer, voice low and deadly. You send your men to burn my gates, and then you come to toast my child? You're either brave or suicidal. Rossetti smirked. Perhaps both. Before Vittorio could respond, Rico stepped between them, tension coiling in his posture. Boss, maybe not here. Rossetti gave a mock salute and drifted back into the crowd. Amber exhaled. The air seemed to shift, colder now. Vittorio glanced at her. Not a word, but something passed between them. A warning. Hours later, the night began to unravel. It started with the lights. A flicker. A hum. Then darkness swallowed the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the floor. The music stopped. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Amber's pulse thundered in her ears. Alara, she called. No answer. She fumbled for her phone, its glow slicing a sliver through the dark. People murmured, panicked, moving toward exits. When the backup generator kicked in, lights buzzed back to life. Harsh, blinding. Alara was gone. The spot where she'd been standing moments ago was empty. Her small glass of water toppled, the liquid mingling with shards of crystal on the floor. Amber's blood ran cold. Vittorio, she shouted. He was already moving, barking orders. Lock every door. Nobody leaves this room. Guards swarmed. Panic spread like wildfire. Amber's eyes darted across the tables, the floor, the crowd, until something caught her attention. On her seat, a small white envelope. Her trembling hands opened it. Inside, a single card with black ink written in an elegant, mocking hand. Trade the girl who saved your daughter. For the daughter herself. Amber's breath hitched. She looked up, finding Vittorio's eyes across the chaos. Their gazes locked, and she saw it. Fury, terror, and something deeper beneath it all. He crossed the room in seconds, snatching the note from her hand. His face darkened with each word. Who touched this? He demanded. I don't know. I was standing right there. Damn it. His fist slammed into the table, sending a glass crashing to the floor. Rico appeared beside him, pale but composed. We've locked the exits. No sign of her yet. Cameras cut out during the blackout. Of course they did, Vittorio muttered, eyes flashing. This wasn't random. This was planned, perfectly. Amber took a step closer. Let me help. You've helped enough, he said sharply. She's my friend. Amber snapped. You think I'll just stand here while She's my daughter. Vittorio roared, his voice echoing through the hall. The guests froze at the sound. For a heartbeat, the Mafia king looked like a man, broken, furious, helpless. Then, quieter, he said, you don't understand what you're asking to walk into. Amber held his gaze. If they wanted me, they'll expect me. Let me be your decoy. He stared at her. Disbelief and admiration tangled in his silence. No, he said finally. I don't use the same person twice to bait a trap. But they already have, she whispered. They used me the moment I called you. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even Rico looked away. Vittorio's jaw clenched, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the man beneath the legend. Get her to the car, he ordered. Boss, Rico began. Now. Amber followed, heart racing, unsure if she'd just won or lost an argument with the devil. The ride through the city was silent, except for the rhythmic thrum of the rain against the windshield. Vittorio sat beside her in the back seat, his phone pressed to his ear, voice low and lethal. Check every safe house, every contact, every rat hole they could use. His tone left no room for failure. Rico, driving, caught Amber's eyes in the rearview mirror. His expression said what his mouth didn't. You shouldn't be here. Vittorio hung up, rubbing his temple. His eyes looked almost human in the flickering streetlight. They traced the signal from her bracelet, he said finally. Alara's tracker pinged once before it went dead. Where? He hesitated. An abandoned theater. The Lyric Hall, down by the docks. Amber's breath caught. That place burned years ago. Exactly, he said. No witnesses. No law. Perfect for ghosts. The car sped through the slush and shadows. Amber glanced at him. You're going after her, aren't you? His silence was answer enough. Then I'm coming too. He turned to her, eyes like storm clouds over steel. If this goes wrong, he said quietly, you die before they touch her. Amber didn't flinch. I already died once, she whispered, when no one saw me. For the first time, Vittorio Santoro didn't argue. The car drove into the snow, its headlights cutting through the dark, straight toward the trap waiting in the ruins. The Lyric Hall rose from the fog like a corpse refusing to stay buried. Its crumbling facade loomed over the icy docks, half consumed by frost and silence. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes. The once grand sign still clung to the rooftop, its letters barely legible beneath layers of grime and snow. Amber's breath clouded the air as she stepped out of the car. Her hands trembled inside her gloves, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was walking into. Vittorio stood a few feet away, a dark silhouette against the snow. His voice was low, steady, lethal. We do this my way. You walk in, you draw them out. My men surround the perimeter. The moment I give the signal, we end it. Amber nodded, clutching her coat tighter. And if something goes wrong? He met her gaze. Then you run. You don't look back. But they both knew she wouldn't. The theater doors groaned as she pushed them open. A gust of cold air swept past her, carrying the scent of mildew and old ash. Inside, the world was shadows and echoes. Broken seats, torn curtains, a stage buried in dust. Every sound, her boots crunching on glass, her breath, seemed too loud. She moved slowly down the aisle toward the faint light flickering near the stage. The spotlight sputtered once, twice, then steadied, illuminating a single figure seated in the front row. Luciano Rossetti. He clapped once, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty hall. So the street rat finally crawls into the king's palace, he said, his tone smooth, mocking. I was beginning to think you'd lost your courage. Amber didn't respond. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She forced her voice to steady. Where's Alara? Luciano smiled, leaning back in the chair. So direct. I can see why he likes you. But tell me, did you really think you could call the devil and walk away? Untouched. Behind him, movement stirred in the darkness. Heavy footsteps. The metallic click of a weapon being cocked. And then he stepped into the light. Rico. Amber's stomach dropped. No. He was holding Alara by the arm, a gun pressed against her side. The little girl's eyes were wide, terrified, her cheeks streaked with tears. Rico's expression was colder than the snow outside. You were never supposed to survive that night, Amber, he said quietly. You were a mistake. A variable no one predicted. Luciano rose from his seat, his smile widening. You see, my dear, Vittorio has always trusted too easily. He builds empires out of loyalty, but loyalty is the easiest thing to sell. Amber's pulse thundered. You switched the insulin, yes? Rico interrupted, his voice flat. I did it for him. He nodded toward Luciano. Vittorio's weakness is his daughter. Always has been. The Santoro Empire needed to bleed. Amber took a step forward. And what about Alara? She's just a child. Collateral, Rico said simply. Alara whimpered, and something inside Amber snapped. She lunged forward, but Luciano's gun was already raised. Aha, he said softly. One more step, and the girl dies. I'd hate to waste such a lovely audience. Amber froze, her fist trembling. Luciano stepped closer, circling her like a predator. Do you know what I find fascinating about you? You had nothing. No name, no home, no reason to exist. And yet one phone call, one act of kindness, threw my entire world into chaos. You ruined months of planning just by caring. He leaned close enough for her to smell the smoke on his breath. That's your curse, little saint. caring in a world like this? Amber's voice was quiet but fierce. Someone has to. Luciano's smile faltered for the briefest moment. How poetic. A sound cut through the air, a faint click. Luciano's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. He'd heard it too. Amber recognized it instantly. Vittorio's signal. She ducked just as the theater doors burst open. Gunfire shattered the silence. Smoke bombs exploded, filling the air with a thick, gray haze. Shadows moved through the fog, Santoro's men, firing with precision. Luciano shouted orders, his voice drowned by chaos. Amber dropped to the ground, covering her head as bullets tore through the velvet seats around her. Amber! She heard Alara scream. She crawled toward the sound, coughing through the smoke. Rico dragged Alara across the stage, gun still aimed. Amber's eyes burned, but she kept moving, inch by inch. Then she saw Vittorio. He emerged from the haze like a specter, black coat swirling. Gun drawn, eyes blazing with fury. His voice boomed through the smoke. Rico! The traitor froze. Boss! Don't, Vittorio said, his tone deadly calm. You don't speak my name again. Rico's face twisted with guilt and defiance. You think you can save her? You built this world, Vittorio. You turned us into monsters. Vittorio's jaw tightened. I gave you a family. You gave me a leash. Rico roared, firing a shot. It missed. Vittorio didn't. His bullet hit Rico square in the chest. The man stumbled, dropped the gun, and collapsed beside the stage stairs. Alara screamed. Luciano tried to run. Amber saw him through the haze, slipping toward the side door. She grabbed a fallen pistol and fired. The shot grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He snarled, raising his weapon toward her, but Vittorio was faster. 2 shots rang out. Luciano fell back onto the stage, his body collapsing under the curtain's torn red fabric. For a moment, everything went still. Smoke hung in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. Amber's hands shook. Blood trickled from her shoulder. She'd been grazed. She barely felt it. Her only thought was Alara. She scrambled across the stage, grabbing the girl and pulling her close. It's okay. You're okay. Alara sobbed into her chest. Vittorio knelt beside them, his gun finally lowering. His face was unreadable, grief, rage, relief all tangled in his eyes. It's over, Amber whispered. He looked around at the destruction. The shattered glass, the flames starting to creep along the curtains. No, he said softly. Not yet. He lifted Alara into his arms. Let's go. They pushed through the smoke, racing toward the exit. Fire licked the walls, consuming the rotten wood. The building groaned around them, years of decay giving way under heat and chaos. Outside, the snowstorm howled. Amber stumbled into the open air, coughing, clutching her wounded shoulder. Vittorio followed, carrying Alara, his coat streaked with ash. Behind them, the theater collapsed in a roar of flame and falling steel. The orange glow reflected in the snow, painting the night in fire and ice. Amber fell to her knees, shaking. Vittorio turned toward her. For once, his voice wasn't commanding, it was human. You're hurt. I've been worse. She tried to smile, though her lips trembled. Alara reached out from his arms, touching Amber's hand. You came for me. Amber's throat tightened. Always. Vittorio looked between them, the snow catching in his hair, melting on his lashes. His voice was a low whisper against the storm. You shouldn't have followed me into this. Amber met his eyes. You shouldn't have gone alone. For the first time, Vittorio Santoro smiled, a small, weary, unguarded thing. The flames behind them consumed the last of the lyric hall, sending embers spiraling into the night sky. And as the 3 of them stood in the falling snow, surrounded by ruin and silence, Amber realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't invisible anymore. Amber woke to silence. Not the kind that haunted alleys or slept under bridges. This silence was softer, thicker, the kind that wrapped itself around her like a blanket instead of a threat. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was white and ornate. The sheets beneath her impossibly smooth. A faint scent of antiseptic and roses filled the room. Morning light slipped through tall windows, fractured by snowflakes melting against the glass. Then the pain came, a dull ache in her shoulder, bandaged tight. It pulled her back to memory, smoke, gunfire, the theater burning like a dying god. She turned her head slowly. Someone was sitting beside the bed. Vittorio. He looked nothing like the immovable figure she'd seen command men with a glance. His dark hair was unkempt. Shadows bruised the skin beneath his eyes. And his suit jacket hung open, creased and stained. For once, he looked mortal, still dangerous, but human. He didn't notice she was awake until she shifted slightly, wincing. His gaze snapped up instantly, sharp even through exhaustion. "You're alive," he said quietly. The words carried relief, so subtle it could have been mistaken for breath. Amber swallowed, her throat dry. "I wasn't sure I'd be." He leaned back in the chair, exhaling through his nose. "Neither was I." Silence settled between them again, heavy but not uncomfortable. The fire crackled in the corner of the room, throwing faint gold light across his face. Amber studied him. He looked older than before, not in years, but in weight. The weight of every life he'd had to control, every ghost that still followed him. "You could have left me," she whispered, breaking the stillness. "When the theater collapsed. You had Alara. You could have just gone." Vittorio's eyes flickered, the faintest ghost of emotion passing through. "So could you," he said softly. Amber blinked. "What?" He rose from the chair, walking to the window. The morning outside was painted in white and gray, the city buried under a blanket of snow. "You could have run," he said. "No one would have blamed you. You didn't know us anything." "I couldn't," she said simply. He turned to face her. "Why?" Amber hesitated. Her voice came out small, but steady. "Because she needed me." Something unspoken passed between them. Vittorio's jaw tightened. He looked away again, one hand resting on the window frame. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I've lost people I couldn't protect," he said. "My wife, my brother, my men." His eyes were distant, somewhere years away. "You remind me of what I used to be, before all this." Amber frowned slightly. "Before what?" He met her gaze, and for once, there was no armor in it. Just pain. Before the world decided that mercy was weakness. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Amber didn't know what to say. She'd seen him as a monster, a myth carved out of violence and fear. But standing there, the snowlight spilling around him, his voice cracked just enough to betray the man under the legend. She saw something else entirely. A father. A husband. A man who had buried too many pieces of himself to survive. "I don't think mercy is weakness," she said quietly. "It's what makes people human." He gave a small, tired laugh. "You sound like Isabella." Amber's pulse skipped. "Your wife." He nodded once. She used to say the same thing. And look where it got her. Amber didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The grief in his voice said everything. She shifted on the bed, trying to sit up. He moved instantly, crossing the room to help her. His hands were firm but gentle, one supporting her back, the other adjusting the pillow behind her. She flinched as the movement tugged at her wound. He stopped immediately, his brow furrowing. "Easy. You took a bullet grazing. You'll heal, but you need rest." "You sound like the doctor," she said, attempting a faint smile. "I pay him to say what I can't." Amber's lips curved slightly, but her eyes were searching. "Why did you come back for me, Vittorio?" He froze at the question. His eyes darkened, unreadable. Then, quietly, "Because you called me once." Amber frowned, not understanding. "The night you found Alara," he said. "You could have walked away. You could have pretended not to see her lying in the snow. But you didn't. You called a stranger. You called me." He looked down at his hands, the faint scar on his knuckle catching the light. "And whether you knew it or not, that call changed everything." Her chest tightened. "You think I changed you?" "I think you reminded me what being alive feels like." Amber looked away, blinking hard. Her eyes burned, not from pain, from something deeper. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Before she could answer, the door opened softly. "Papa." Alara's small voice floated into the room. Vittorio turned immediately, the hardness in his expression melting. "Come here, Piccola." The little girl rushed in, her long hair braided neatly, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She carried a tray with a mug of hot chocolate and a small plate of toast. "I wanted to help," she said shyly, setting it on the bedside table. Amber smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." Alara hesitated, then suddenly threw her arms around Amber. "Papa says you're family now," she murmured into her shoulder. Amber froze. Family. The word hit her harder than the bullet ever could. She hadn't heard it in years. Not since her mother's funeral. Not since the world stopped belonging to her. Her throat closed, and she held the little girl tighter. He did, huh? Alara nodded, smiling up at her. He said you saved us both. Vittorio was watching them quietly, something soft and almost fragile in his eyes. Amber met his gaze over Alara's head. I think we saved each other, she said. He inclined his head, almost imperceptibly, an agreement without words. Later, when Alara had been sent off to rest, and the sun had climbed higher in the sky, Amber sat by the window, watching the snow melt on the garden statues below. The mansion felt different now, less like a fortress, more like a place holding its breath. Vittorio joined her, hands in his pockets. For a while, they just sat there, two survivors in the same silence that once felt unbearable. Finally, Amber spoke. What happens now? Vittorio glanced at her. Now. A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. Now I rebuild. Protect what's mine. And me? He studied her for a moment. You stay? If you want. Amber arched a brow. As what? He considered, then said softly. As yourself. For once. Amber smiled faintly, the kind that starts small but carries warmth. That's new. Then maybe it's time for something new, he replied. The morning light washed over them both, and for the first time, Amber didn't feel like she was trespassing in someone else's life. She belonged, not because someone allowed it, but because she'd earned it. Outside, the snow kept falling, gentle and endless. A reminder that even after the storm, beauty could still return. And somewhere deep inside the Santoro mansion, in the quiet heart of a man who'd forgotten what peace felt like, warmth was beginning to thaw the ice. Winter had returned to Riverbend Avenue, not the cruel, biting kind that used to chase Amber from corner to corner, but a gentler one. The kind that softened rooftops and made the city glow under its quiet white veil. From the balcony of the Santoro mansion, she watched it fall, the flakes drifting like whispers through the cold night air. Below, the gardens shimmered with frost, and the fountains, once frozen solid, now trickled faintly, alive again. It had been 6 weeks since the fire. 6 weeks since the night the theater burned down and the war between Santoro and Rossetti ended. 6 weeks since Amber Robinson stopped being invisible. The mansion had changed too. Guards still patrolled the gates, but they smiled now, a small, unspoken acknowledgement whenever she passed. The staff, once silent and mechanical, had begun to laugh again in the kitchen. Even Alara's laughter echoed through the marble halls, bright and untamed. Amber had her own room now, with windows that faced the east, where the sun bled gold across the snow each morning. She had clothes that fit, food that didn't come from dumpsters, and most of all, warmth, not just from the fire, but from belonging. Yet sometimes, late at night, she still woke up expecting to hear the wind howling through the alleys, expecting the cold concrete beneath her. Survival had trained her to flinch at peace. But each morning, Alara's voice, soft, sleepy, calling her name, reminded her that those days were gone. Tonight, she stood at the balcony rail, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa. The air smelled like pine and smoke, and the city stretched out below, alive and glimmering, the same city that once never saw her. Footsteps approached behind her, slow and deliberate. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Vittorio stepped beside her, his overcoat draped loosely across his shoulders, his hair silvered at the edges from the cold. He leaned on the rail beside her, silent for a long moment. Together, they watched the snow drift over the lights of Chicago like falling ash. For once, he didn't carry that constant tension in his posture, the kind born of command and paranoia. The war was over. The Rossetti syndicate had fallen apart. The traitors were buried. For the first time in years, Vittorio Santoro looked at rest. The city's quieter now, Amber said softly. It is, he murmured. Too quiet, maybe. She smiled faintly. You don't trust peace? He exhaled, his breath fogging in the air. Peace makes men forget who they are. Makes them soft. Amber looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. Or maybe it reminds them who they were before the noise. That drew the smallest smile from him, the kind that barely reached his eyes but still cracked through the cold. They stood there for a while in silence, the world hushed beneath the snow. Then, finally, Vittorio spoke again, his voice low, almost uncertain. The night you called me, he said, his gaze still fixed on the lights below. I thought it was another trap. We were already surrounded by enemies then. Every call, Every message, a potential ambush. He turned to her, the flicker of the balcony lantern catching the faint scar at his jawline. But it wasn't a trap. It was a miracle. Amber's heart tightened. She didn't know what to say, so she looked back at the snow instead. It was easier than meeting the kind of truth that lived in his eyes. "I wasn't looking for a miracle," she whispered. "Just someone to listen." Vittorio's voice softened. "And you found a man who hadn't listened to anyone in years." She laughed quietly under her breath, shaking her head. "Guess we both got unlucky." He chuckled, a rare, quiet sound that made the air feel warmer. Or lucky, depending on how you see it. The wind swept across the balcony, tugging at her hair. Amber pulled her coat tighter. "I never thanked you," she said after a moment, "for not leaving me there." "You already did," he said simply. "When the night you walked into this house and didn't run." She glanced at him then, and something unspoken passed between them. The shared memory of fire and snow, danger and salvation, loss and something that had started to look like healing. Vittorio studied her quietly. "You could still leave, you know. You don't owe me, or Alara, or this place anything." Amber looked down at the mug in her hands, then at the endless sprawl of city lights below. "You really